كتاب الله لا شيء سواه يهذبنا العمل به كتاب الله لا شيء سواه يهذبنا هذا القرآن يوحدنا لطريق الخير يوجهنا الله تعالى أنزله ورسول الله معلمنا رسول الله معلمنا.
Oh, yes. Well, there's not a great deal that's spelled out because he's asking about the position of women in Christianity. There's not a great deal that's spelled out because you don't really have a code of law that's set down, in that you have a code of law from that the Jews have had all these years, but basically the majority of Christianity would say, yes, but we set that aside. We don't need that. We don't go by those guidelines. That's old-fashioned. We have another way of looking at it. But then the frustration is there's not very much set down by way of an outline. The only comments that I can recall that are ever made about women in any method of saying this is their place, this is what they should do, and so on, are by Paul, who was frankly seems to be a misogynist. He hated women. He said it was because of women that sin came into the world. In fact, he gave a recommendation. He says, better a man should never even marry. He said, but if you're weak, go ahead. He says, you must. Better you shouldn't. He says, I don't allow a woman to speak in front of a man. She should keep her head covered, so that as a sign of submission to her husband. Some comments like that are very unfortunate, which is why you have a great dispute now over where there are women trying to take the lead in some churches, and people react against that and say, yes, but what would Paul say? He'd be very shocked at this. And yet at the same time, there are women reported through writings of the book of Acts after the time of Jesus who were well respected in the community. So if you see that the difficulty is probably Christians didn't treat women badly, but if they want to stick to their authorities, the only pronouncements on the subject of women they have come from a man who didn't think very much of women, and stressed that that was not part of the religion anyway. He stressed, this is my opinion. As far as when it came to marriage, for example, he says, God didn't tell me what to say about this, but I'll give you my opinion. You're better off not to get married. So it becomes a wide open kind of a thing, I guess. You say, what's the position in Christianity? There's no Christian source, because the only thing that comments on it, the man begins by saying, but this isn't what God said, it's just what I'd prefer. And if people would imitate that in spite of that demand, then they're putting women in an unfortunate position. That's maybe an oversimplification, but it's a very big subject right now. Trying to think of what other... Yeah, the only other reference I can think of that is it's reported Jesus made a serious comment about divorce. He was saying how the Jews treated it very carelessly. He said that you divorce without sufficient reason and so on, that you should be more careful, that the only legitimate grounds are these, so that he tried to patch up the arrangement, which seems like a positive move. You see, that's not the negativism of Paul. Yeah, how did he put it? He said, better to marry than to burn. That's what it was. He said, if you can't stand it, if you're burning up, then get married. He said, otherwise, you're better off not to. It's better to marry than to burn. Yes, well, that's offered sometimes as an objection, but it's kind of funny when people do that because they don't know their own background. I always ask people, so how many wives can a Christian man have? And of course they'll tell you, only one. Then you want to ask them, does it say that someplace in your book? Because it doesn't. And history will tell you that it wasn't the case anyway. What you will find, even in Paul's writings again, he recommends, he says, if a man wants to take charge of a group of people, if he wants to be a bishop, let him restrict himself to one wife. Says he's going to be so busy. He's trying to say, my advice is, if he's going to be an overseer, a bishop, he should have one wife. The historical realities are that up until 300 years ago even, that was well known, the Lutheran Church encouraged men to take more than one wife after the warfare of 300 years ago had so lowered the male population. So when King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, and the church said, no, you can't, his own spiritual advisors, the priests, told him, don't divorce her. But this other one you want to marry? Marry her. The church won't be able to say anything about it. You will have them on a technicality because they don't have a law that says you can't have more than one wife. Instead, he broke with the church and divorced her. But what I'm getting at is the idea of monogamy is a tradition. It's not part of the religion. It was never part of Judaism, for that matter. The Jewish law, I believe, was something that was 5 wives for an ordinary man, 18 for the king. This is how the law was actually set down, or it became set down in rabbinical Judaism from the Talmud. In Islam, of course, there's a great deal of qualification to that. That must be abused by some people, I suppose. But it's set down with some qualifications. It's evidently there to solve a problem. It's not to give a wide open permission. In fact, there's a place which talks about marrying 4. The ayah is talking about widows and orphans. Evidently, what's under discussion right there is solving the problem of widows and orphans. Maybe what you ought to do is marry them. See, so it's much more than just some kind of a blanket permission in Islam, which is what people are generally not aware of. But you do best in replying to that or any other question not to tell somebody how good it is. Somebody says, look, you people can have more than one wife. You don't want to say, yes, that's good because. He doesn't want to hear that. You have to start a step before that and tell him, do you say something different? You have to make him realize maybe his challenge isn't worth very much. Then maybe they'll come along and ask you, why do you do that anyway? Now you can tell him he was ready to hear what are the benefits of this. Okay? Yes? Yes, well, of course it's literal, but that's just it. You see, that's an artificial distinction that is found in when people start talking about the Bible. They'll tell quite a story because it says something like, God walked in the garden, he made noise when he walked, and he called Adam, where are you, and so on. It becomes a very funny-sounding thing, so they say, well, this must have an allegorical interpretation because God doesn't walk and make noise with his feet and so on when he walks, so this is allegorical. But you don't have that problem in the Quran. It tells you that mankind is made of a single nafs. It's literal enough. Your problem might be in making it too literal to say, what does this nafs mean? Could mean nothing more than a single kind, because mythology was, in many areas, will tell you that men and women are different creatures. They come from different places. The Quran tells you, no, men and women, they come from each other. They're one kind, one nafs. To be more specific than that, maybe then you cross into being too literal. In other words, you force more out of the words than is there. So it's not exactly the division that you're talking about. Is it allegorical? Is it literal? It's literal. But you can insist, and then you would exceed your authority to say these words mean more than they actually say, that it happened like this. As, for example, the ayah saying the one was made from the other, if you tended to follow the biblical story, which said, yes, a rib was taken from Adam and made into a woman. Well, the Quran doesn't say that. It says the one came from the other. That's all. You see, stop here. If you start spelling out details, then you become much too literal.